I signed up for the Appalachian Ultramarathon on a whim, maybe out of boredom, maybe out of some deeper need to prove I wasn't wasting away in my 30s. The official name was American Wilderness Marathon, Tri-State Endurance Series, a 110-mile race cutting through untouched forest, crossing from Pennsylvania into West Virginia, and finishing in the heart of the Pine Barrens in New Jersey. I had heard about it through a forum thread that had no official links, just a vague flyer PDF with strange iconography at the corners, triangles, antlers, eyes, but the rest seemed legitimate enough. The prize pool was unusually large for such a niche event. I remember thinking it was odd how little information there was online, but at that point, the idea of unplugging and disappearing into the woods for 4 days seemed like medicine. I was burned out from my job at the agency, tired of backlit screens and empty conversations. The race promised isolation, silence, sweat, dirt, pain, the kind of honesty modern life doesn't allow. I arrived at the first staging area just outside of Wharton State Forest in Pennsylvania. It was dusk when I pulled into the dirt lot. My phone's GPS stopped updating 10 miles back. No service. I chalked it up to bad reception and didn't think much of it until I saw the tent. It wasn't like the glossy Red Bull branded setups you'd expect. This one was canvas, dull brown, sagging at the center, with no signage except a black flag hanging limply from the side, with a stitched white glyph I didn't recognize, like a forked serpent coiled around a mountain. There were no sponsors, no banners, no media, no drones, just the tent, a table inside with a stack of beige manila folders, and a single laptop that looked like it had survived 2 wars. A man sat behind it. He didn't look up when I walked in. His name tag read Marshall R. in Sharpie. No last name. He looked military, clean haircut, eyes flat like washed out steel. I told him my name. He didn't ask for ID, just slid a folder across the table and nodded toward a line of runners outside waiting in silence. I opened the folder. Inside were printed maps marked with sharp red ink and a list of checkpoints with vague names like Spire Clearing and Echo Gate. No elevation data, no terrain notes, no times. At the bottom, a waiver, 4 pages of small print. The last sentence stood out. By signing, you agree to complete the course in its entirety. Any deviation from the marked path nullifies all protections and releases the organizers from liability or intervention. I signed anyway. The next table offered gear tags, ration kits, and a thermal blanket. One of the volunteers, a young woman with dark hair and 2 wide eyes, whispered, "If you see a building, don't enter it, even if you think it's real." I laughed, thinking she was trying to be spooky. She didn't laugh back. A cold breeze swept through the trees. I noticed then that the leaves weren't rustling with it. It passed through, but the forest stood still, like a photograph. My skin prickled. Back at my car, I checked the gear one last time. GPS tracker, trail camera, protein gels, water filters. I noticed something new tucked into the gear bag. A laminated tag labeled Runner ID, Zeta Group. I hadn't been told anything about groups. I saw others with tags labeled Theta, Omicron, Kappa. The runners weren't mingling. Nobody spoke. The air was heavy with a kind of sleepwalking seriousness, like we were all actors in a play whose script we hadn't read. At 2100 hours, a loudspeaker crackled to life with a burst of static. No voice followed, just a slow, pulsing tone. 3 notes, low, high, low, then silence. A man in a gray jumpsuit walked the lot with a clipboard and began directing runners into the forest in staggered waves. No big start line, no countdown, no crowd. When my time came, he handed me a red wristband with a metal disc embedded in it and said, "Headlamp on. Trail opens ahead. Do not leave the path. Do not engage with any response." I asked him what that meant. He didn't answer, just pointed into the dark trees. The trail was marked with fluorescent ribbon, red and yellow alternating every 15 feet. The first 2 miles felt like any other night trail run. My breathing evened out. The rhythm of movement pushed back the unease. I heard owls, distant frogs, the crunch of pine needles underfoot. Then the ribbons changed. They were black and blue now, and they shimmered strangely under the headlamp, like oil on water. The forest here felt older, denser, not just in vegetation, but in presence. The kind of ancientness you can't describe unless you've felt it pressing in from all sides like a cathedral of breathless judgment. That was when I saw the first mile marker. It wasn't a standard trail sign, just a slab of polished stone, half buried, with the number 1 carved in Roman numerals and a symbol beneath it, a horned animal with wings. I passed 3 more markers like that, each with a different symbol, a spiral, an eye, a set of concentric circles. At mile 4, I stopped to drink. That's when I noticed the temperature. It had dropped sharply, too sharply for the mild September night. I could see my breath, yet the air didn't feel cold on my skin. It was like standing in front of a freezer with the door open but no chill, just the presence of cold without the sensation. My watch was glitching. Time kept jumping forward and back. I tapped the side, tried to restart it, but the screen froze at 0. Around mile 6, I passed a small wooden sign nailed to a tree. It simply read, "Remember the order, sight, sound, shape." No idea what that meant. Another runner passed me without a word. He had no headlamp, just a reflective patch on his back with the number 17. His gait was strange, too smooth, almost mechanical. I called out, "Hey man, you good?" He didn't even flinch. I jogged to catch up, but when I turned the next bend, he was gone. No footsteps, no motion, just silence. Later, I found a set of footprints veering slightly off the trail into a thicket. Something instinctive screamed for me not to follow. I stayed on path. I kept moving. Another mile marker. This time the carving was different, not a symbol. A word in block letters. Return. I blinked. When I looked again, it was just the Roman numeral 7. At the 8-mile checkpoint, there was supposed to be water, a heat tent, volunteers. The map said, Safe Zone 1. But what I found was an empty pavilion with an old rotary phone on a metal chair. It was ringing. I didn't answer. I didn't touch it. Just stared at it until the sound stopped. Then it rang again, and again. I left it behind. The trail narrowed. I started seeing things in the periphery, shadows too tall, shapes that vanished when I turned. I told myself it was fatigue, adrenaline. Night running always plays tricks. But this wasn't that. The forest wasn't watching me. It was waiting for something. At mile 10, I found another runner. A woman hunched over, facing away. Her ID tag read Theta 9. I touched her shoulder. Her head rolled unnaturally as she turned, face slack, eyes open but not seeing. She whispered, "The sky is wrong." Then she stood and ran off the trail into the woods. I didn't follow. I checked the map. The next checkpoint was 13.2 miles in, labeled only as boundary. There was a note written by hand beneath it. "If you pass the boundary, you are observed." I didn't know what that meant. I only knew one thing now. This wasn't a race. It never was. And the tent I signed up in, that strange registration point with no logo, no digital record, and a flag with a symbol I couldn't name. It wasn't there when I looked for it on the satellite image before I came. Just forest. Old forest. Forest with a long memory. I kept running, because I didn't know what else to do. By the time I reached mile 23, the rhythm of the race had eroded into something else entirely. The miles had stopped behaving like distances. They felt more like states of mind, each one more distorted than the last. My legs still moved, but the terrain beneath them had grown inconsistent. The ground softened without warning, then turned brittle. Roots bulged from beneath the surface like veins under skin. Rocks were warm to the touch, even though the air was now cold enough to bite into the sweat on my neck. But it wasn't the cold that unnerved me. It was the trees. I didn't notice it until mile 21, but once I did, I couldn't unsee it. The trees weren't moving correctly. They swayed in opposite directions. One grove might lean toward the west, while another bent toward the east, and some didn't move at all, not even with the wind. A thin mist had begun to creep along the underbrush, hugging the soil and rising just high enough to cover my boots. My headlamp flickered, dimmed, then surged. The trail ribbon was still there, now blue and orange, but it was less frequent, like someone had stopped marking the path entirely, or worse, like someone wanted us to feel unmoored. I hadn't seen another runner since mile 17. At checkpoint 15, I passed what looked like a volunteer station, but it was completely abandoned. There were folding chairs, a cooler turned on its side, and a half-eaten sandwich resting on a paper plate, green with mold that hadn't been there a few hours earlier. I didn't stop. I didn't call out. I felt the same thing I imagine sailors feel when they see land that shouldn't be there. A deep, irrational instinct that whispers, "Keep going or drown." At mile 22, I crossed a small wooden bridge spanning a stream I didn't remember from the map. I paused to drink, filtering the water through my PAX system. That's when I heard it. Footsteps, no, hooves, clattering on stone. Fast, heavy, approaching from the other side of the bridge. I turned, expecting a deer, maybe an elk. But there was nothing, just the sound of something that had already passed. When I resumed, the trail began to curve unnaturally, looping back in a spiral before straightening again. I knew the geography of the area from satellite images. This spiral shouldn't exist, but I was afraid to question it now. Each deviation from reality chipped away at the logic I clung to. At the center of the spiral, I passed a tree with something nailed to it. Not a marker, a Polaroid photo. I stopped. The picture was weathered, faded, and stained with water, but I could make out the shape of a person, arms stretched out, mouth open. The eyes were scribbled out with black ink. Below the photo, someone had written in red ballpoint, "Did you see it?" No one else did. That was when I realized I hadn't heard a single bird since dusk. Not one. The silence was now more terrifying than sound. It pressed into my skull, made my heartbeat feel like thunder. Then just before mile marker 23, I saw him. A man, standing in the center of the trail, still as the trees around him. He wore a runner's bib like mine, but the number was upside down. 611, or maybe 119. His skin was gray, not pale. Gray, as if the blood had forgotten how to feed him. He was breathing. Barely. I called out, "Hey, you all right?" No response. I moved closer, cautiously. My hand reached for the emergency flare clipped to my belt. Then I noticed his eyes. He had none. Just empty sockets, black and wet. And he was smiling. He whispered something. I couldn't hear it. I leaned in closer. "It watches differently when you know it's real," he said. I froze. He tilted his head toward the tree line. I followed his gaze. That's when I saw it. Something large crouched between two trees. Tall, winged, but hunched, watching. The moment I made eye contact, it unfolded. Not like a person rising, but like a structure collapsing in reverse. Legs too long, joints bending in the wrong directions. Wings dragging behind it like wet paper. And those eyes. Red, yes, but not glowing. They shimmered like veins behind glass. Not angry, curious. I ran. I didn't look back. I didn't care if the man was following or gone or had never existed. I ran until the taste of blood filled my throat, until the headlamp beam trembled with my pulse, until I stumbled into mile marker 23. It was different from the others. It was made of metal, bolted into the earth. Someone had carved into the base with a knife. This is where they start counting backwards. I collapsed behind a fallen log, panting, listening for pursuit. There was nothing, only silence. Then a rustle. I spun, flashlight raised. It was a deer. At least that's what I told myself at first. But it wasn't. The legs were too thin, the head too small, the body too long, and its mouth, open, panting, mimicking my breath. It stood on the trail for a long time, twitching like a film skipping frames. Then it walked away, on two legs. I stayed behind the log for almost an hour. I checked my watch. Still frozen at Mar no Mariero. My backup GPS was gone, torn from my strap. I don't remember losing it. Maybe I never had it. The mist thickened. I could hear whispers in the fog, but they weren't words, just syllables trying to become language. I held on to one thought, the finish line. Keep moving. Keep the path in sight. Don't stray. Don't stray. Don't stray. When I finally stood, I noticed something odd about the trees. They'd shifted. Not just their positions, but their shapes. Branches formed arcs over the path, twisting in patterns that reminded me of alphabets I didn't know. Some bark was marked with symbols, not carved, grown that way. I snapped a photo with my phone. The screen showed nothing, just black. No light, no data, no interface. Dead. I pressed on, careful now. Every step forward felt like a negotiation. My brain kept suggesting I was hallucinating. Hypothermia, fatigue, stress. But my feet kept moving. Because some part of me understood that whatever was happening, it was designed, or worse, observed. I was inside something, not just the forest. Something older, deeper. At the next junction, there was a post with 3 arrows. One pointing left, observation. One right, continuance. One down the center, exit. I followed the center path. I didn't want to know what the other two meant. That's when I heard music, barely audible, like an old radio playing jazz through a broken speaker. And beneath it, voices, whispering names I didn't recognize, names that sounded wrong, like someone translating syllables from dreams. I came upon another runner. He was lying in the middle of the trail, breathing, eyes wide open. I shook him. He blinked but didn't speak. In his hand was a paper wristband like mine, but the name printed on it wasn't his. It was mine. I left him there. At mile marker 24, the trees stopped moving entirely. They were waiting for something, or someone. Maybe me. I don't remember the exact moment I began to dissociate from my own body. Somewhere between mile 24 and 26, the forest stopped being terrain and became something more abstract, like I was navigating the subconscious of the landscape itself. My steps were automatic, mechanical, stripped of intention. I wasn't running anymore. I was continuing. That was the only word my brain could hold. Continue. Just continue. Forward was safer than stillness. Stillness meant attention. Attention meant being seen. And being seen meant becoming a story whispered by the trees long after my name had no mouth left to speak it. The trail narrowed again, forcing me through a corridor of trees whose trunks bent toward the path like sentinels. The bark was pale, ashen, flaking in vertical ribbons. There was a smell too, something earthy at first, like turned soil, but layered beneath it, something faintly metallic, like the taste of blood when you bite your lip in winter. I started hearing footsteps behind me, soft at first, matched perfectly with mine. I tested it, I stopped. The sound stopped. I stepped again. So did it. I didn't look back. I told myself it was my own echo, but I knew it wasn't. At mile 26, the trail opened slightly, forming a small clearing where a checkpoint had been set up, or had once been. There were wooden crates, some split open and emptied, and a tarp half buried under the brush, weighed down with stones as if someone had tried to hide it in a hurry. But what drew my attention was the flare, still glowing faintly red, stuck into the soft earth at the center of the clearing. A trail of footprints led from it into the trees on the left. They were small, light, not boots, running shoes. I recognized the pattern. It was the woman I'd seen at the registration tent, the one who whispered not to enter buildings. I called out, once, twice, no answer. But something in the trees moved, not like a deer or a bear. It didn't move between the trees. It moved with them, a syncopated shifting, synchronized but not natural. The trees leaned as it passed, as if nodding in recognition. I picked up the flare and followed the footprints. They led me away from the trail, downhill, into a hollow, thick with fog. The ground was damp, uneven. I nearly fell twice. My breath came harder now, not from exertion, but because the air felt wrong, too thick, too humid for the cold, like I'd stepped into a greenhouse left to rot. That's when I heard her scream. It wasn't the scream of someone who'd tripped or been startled. It was primal, rupturing the air with a sound so raw, it felt like it tore through the fabric of the forest itself. I sprinted, slipping on moss-slick stone, branches clawing at my jacket. The scream came again, closer now, then suddenly stopped, as if swallowed mid-breath. I reached a slope and climbed to the top, where I found the source of the footprints. A woman's running vest, torn and stained. A GPS unit cracked open, screen shattered. Nearby, a white bib fluttered against a branch, still attached to a scrap of cloth. Theta 3. The mist began to thin just enough for me to see what lay ahead. A chasm. Not wide, no more than 5 feet across, but deep, black. I couldn't see the bottom. At the edge, drag marks, as if something had pulled her, no, dropped her, down. I dropped to my stomach and leaned over slowly. My headlamp beam pierced only a few feet before vanishing into darkness. Then, movement. Far below, just barely visible, something shifted. Wings, massive, leathery, but slow, deliberate, as if they weren't used for flight, but for ceremony. Then, eyes. 2 orbs of dull crimson rising from the void, looking up at me, unblinking, not glowing, reflecting, as if the creature could see through the darkness, through the stone, through time. I recoiled, heartbeat hammering my ribs. As I scrambled backward, the beam of my headlamp caught something carved into the rock face beside the chasm. Tall letters, etched with shaking hands. We are the signal. I didn't know what it meant, but I knew I had to move. I returned to the trail, breathless, disoriented, but still moving. When I crossed into mile 27, the landscape had changed. The trees were spaced too evenly, their trunks unnaturally smooth. No bark, no branches below the canopy. It felt artificial, like a replica of a forest grown in a lab. The only sound was the static hum that had replaced wind. I saw another runner ahead, barely a silhouette through the gray. I called out, and to my surprise, he stopped, turned. It was a man in his 40s maybe, eyes hollow with exhaustion. He didn't smile, didn't speak, just pointed upward. Above us, high in the branches, something hung. At first I thought it was a piece of fabric, maybe a discarded thermal blanket. But then I saw fingers, arms. It was a body, suspended by something I couldn't see, slowly rotating in the air as if caught in a breeze we couldn't feel. There was no visible wound, just a stillness so complete it defied gravity. The other runner looked at me and finally spoke. "This isn't where she fell." I blinked. "What? She fell farther east?" "This one." He trailed off, eyes glassy. Then, he climbed too high. He turned and walked away, not toward the trail, but directly into the trees. I didn't follow. From then on, the trail markings became erratic, some tied to trees upside down, others wrapped in bundles, knotted into grotesque shapes. I saw one nailed into a deer skull mounted to a post. Each marker after that became less familiar, more like symbols than guidance. Spirals, inverted crosses, arrows pointing in circles. I relied on instinct now. Instinct and the slow, burning certainty that I was being drawn somewhere specific. At mile 29, I reached another checkpoint, this one intact. A tent, lights, a table with water bottles, a medic in a gray coat. Relief flooded me. I approached, stammering out what had happened. The scream, the chasm, the body. He didn't respond, just nodded, handed me a bottle and said, "You're almost at Sightline Z, just 5 more miles." I asked him what that meant. Sightline Z. Was it a base camp? An evac point? A joke? He looked at me then, really looked, and said, "It's where you'll start seeing it differently. Don't make eye contact, don't run uphill, and if you hear it breathing, cover your ears." I didn't sleep that night. I didn't rest. I walked the next 3 miles until the sun broke through the canopy, not as light, but as an artificial glow, something that looked like sunrise but lacked warmth, like someone behind the sky had forgotten how to program color correctly. At mile 32, I found another body, but this one was still warm. Her eyes were open, and she had no mouth. I didn't scream when I saw her. That was the strangest part. I should have screamed. A woman lying on the forest floor, still warm skin glazed with dew, staring at nothing with eyes stretched wide, and a face frozen mid-silent scream where her mouth used to be, where there was now only skin, smooth and seamless, as if her lips had never existed. My brain tried to tell me it was a hallucination, a warning sign of collapse. But the cold coming off her skin, the condensation on her eyelashes, the faint scent of copper in the air, it was all too real. She had been alive minutes ago, and someone, or something, had silenced her. Not killed her, silenced her. I backed away slowly, my knees shaking so hard I almost fell into her. Every nerve screamed to run, but some invisible pressure pressed down on the trail around me, like the air itself was waiting to see what I would do next. The trees around her didn't sway. The birds didn't move. The silence wasn't just unnatural. It was curated. A museum stillness. A specimen waiting for the next observer. A trail marker was tied to a branch nearby. Number 33 in red ink. Not white like the others. This one was freshly printed. Not weather-worn, not faded. As if someone had placed it here this morning. I kept walking. The next section of the trail had changed. The soil was no longer brown but rust-colored. The consistency of dried blood turned to dust. It clung to my boots, staining them. The trees grew wider apart, and their trunks were wrapped in what looked like old police tape. Except there were no words. Just symbols printed in repeating patterns. Circles with slashes, horizontal 8s, spirals with tiny ticks around the edges like clock faces. I knew enough to recognize them as glyphs, but not enough to understand them. Some part of me wanted to tear one down, just to see what would happen. But the deeper instinct, the one that kept me alive this long, told me not to touch anything that looked like it had been placed with intention. At mile 34, I came to what runners before me had called the Red Mile. I didn't know why they called it that until I stood at its entrance. The trail dipped into a valley choked with fog, and every tree on either side was marked with red. Sometimes slashes, sometimes handprints, sometimes full-blown messages scrawled in crimson ink that looked too thick to be paint. Don't speak. Don't sleep. Their names are in the dirt. Only the hollow echo back. These weren't left by organizers. These were warnings, etched in desperation. I stepped into the fog and sound changed. My breathing, once loud in my ears, became muted. My footsteps felt cushioned, as if the earth had become sponge. The air was dense, but not heavy. It carried no scent, just blankness. A sensory vacuum. That's when I noticed something even stranger. The fog didn't reflect light. My headlamp beam didn't bounce off particles. It was like shining a light into fabric. The only thing visible was what the trail wanted me to see. And then came the sound. Not loud, not sudden, just wrong. It came from the left side of the trail, down a slight slope into the trees. At first I thought it was an owl. Low, rhythmic, almost like a coo. But it kept going. A slow in, a pause, a slow out. Breathing. Controlled. Intentional. A lung not designed for air, but simulating the gesture. I froze mid-step. The sound didn't stop. It didn't change. It didn't acknowledge me. That, more than anything, filled me with dread. I wasn't important enough to be noticed. Not yet. I moved faster. Not running, but urgent walking. The sound followed, still from the left, always from the left. I didn't dare look. I knew if I did, something would change, and I couldn't afford that, not here. The messages etched on the trees blurred past me. My water pack sloshed, reminding me how little I had left. My GPS was dead. My emergency flare was missing. I hadn't even noticed. At mile 35, I emerged from the fog into another clearing, but this one wasn't natural. It was circular, too perfect, with burned-out torches stuck into the ground every 10 feet, forming a perimeter. In the center, a metal pole with an old-school tape recorder strapped to it, blinking red. A sticky note hung from it. Play me. I hesitated for a full minute, then pressed play. The voice that came out wasn't what I expected. It was a woman, maybe in her 30s, calm but trembling. If you're hearing this, you made it through the Red Mile. That's good. That means you still belong to yourself. Don't speak to anyone unless they call you by the name on your race bib. If someone asks for your help, check their shoes. If they're barefoot, run. If you hear breathing behind you, don't stop. If you see your own face ahead of you, close your eyes and turn around. This part of the trail, it rearranges memory. It's not just hallucination, it's extraction. The tape stopped. Click. That was it. No explanation. No rescue instructions. Just more riddles. I didn't linger. I left the clearing and entered a part of the trail that wound along a ridge, narrow and steep. To the left, a drop. To the right, dense thicket. I walked the ridge for maybe 20 minutes before I noticed something in the distance. A figure, standing in the trail, facing away from me. They didn't move, not even to shift weight, just stood as if waiting. I slowed my steps, unsure whether to approach or retreat. Then they turned. It was me, or a perfect replica. Same jacket, same bib, same scratch above the eyebrow I'd gotten climbing the chasm ridge. The double didn't speak, didn't gesture, just stared. I remembered the tape recorder. If you see your own face. I closed my eyes. I turned around. I ran. Behind me, no footsteps followed, no breathing. But I knew, with the kind of knowing that lives in the marrow, that something had changed. Something had marked me, seen me, and wouldn't need to trick me again. The copy was a warning, not a weapon, a placeholder for something else. At mile 36, I reached the boundary marker for Sightline Z, a crude sign nailed into a tree, charred. The edges still smoldered. There were no staff members, no other runners, just the horizon falling away into a valley below that didn't match the map. Too wide, too deep, too still. A place that hadn't been touched by sunlight in centuries. A place that had been waiting. And somewhere in that valley, something breathed in again. The sound didn't echo, because the valley had no intention of letting sound come back. The farther I descended into the valley, the more the world seemed to rearrange itself. At first it was subtle. Shadows cast in directions that didn't match the angle of the sun. Trees with branches that curled inward as if trying to protect their own cores. soil that crunched underfoot with a brittle texture like thin glass. But soon the changes grew bolder. My watch, dead for hours, blinked to life for just a moment and displayed the wrong date, March 11th, 1987, and then blacked out again. My race bib, which I hadn't touched, was now smeared with something like soot, though I hadn't passed through any fire. And the radio, the emergency beacon clipped to my vest, began to emit a soft repeating static that almost sounded like speech if I tilted my head just right. But no matter how I adjusted the dial, I couldn't isolate the source. It wasn't a broadcast. It was something mimicking one. The valley had a name once, but no one used it anymore. On old surveyor maps, it was labeled SL0, a placeholder title from the early days of topographical logging, before the land was privatized, before the marathon became legend. In documents buried deep in local archives, it was sometimes referred to as the Cut, not because it bisected the region, but because everything that entered it seemed to be cut off from time, memory, and in some cases, reality itself. At mile 37, the path narrowed into what resembled an old service road, paved once, long ago, now cracked and swallowed by moss and time. Faint outlines of tire tracks ran parallel for a few dozen feet and then disappeared into overgrowth. I followed the road, guided not by signs, but by the droning hum coming from my vest. The radio signal, if I could still call it that, had changed pitch. It was slower now, pulsing, almost rhythmic, like a heartbeat slowed to a crawl. I turned a bend and found the remnants of a fence, rusted, broken, sagging into the earth. Beyond it stood a structure that had no business being there. A broadcast tower, skeletal and decaying, tilted at a precarious angle, its highest sections twisted as if by impact or design. Around its base were the ruins of what might have been a small relay station or comms shack, though it had long since collapsed in on itself. The tower emitted no light, no sound, and yet every fiber of my body recognized it as the origin point of the signal. I stepped closer, the static growing louder in my earpiece. My breath fogged, even though the air wasn't cold. I reached out and touched the rusted frame, and in that moment the radio clicked into clarity. Not a voice, not exactly, a pattern, a cadence, numbers repeated in a mechanical, stilted rhythm. 37, 13, 11, 9, 37, 13, 11, 9, over and over. I wrote them down in the notebook I'd tucked into my vest days ago. The moment I finished, the signal cut to silence. Inside the crumbling station was nothing of value. Broken shelves, melted glass, the frame of what used to be a console or control panel. But one thing remained untouched. A map pinned to the back wall, yellowed with age but legible. The trail was marked, crude, hand-drawn, with points labeled in red ink. Some I recognized. Red Mile, Echo Divide, Cradle Hollow. Others I didn't. The Chapel, Twin Faces, Where They Feed. One was circled 3 times in ink that looked fresher than the rest. Z Point. I didn't know what it meant, but it was aligned with the general direction of the final miles. I had no choice but to keep going. As I left the station, I noticed the air had grown thicker, not with fog, but with vibration. A low-frequency hum beneath my feet, as though the ground was resonating in sympathy with something buried beneath it. The trees along the path had changed again, now covered in a slick sheen, like sap, but darker, almost metallic. The leaves shimmered faintly, even though no light touched them. I began to feel pressure in my ears as if descending into deep water. At mile 38, I found the first of the repeaters, small rusted devices half buried in the earth, each no bigger than a shoebox, but humming with life. As I passed, they lit up faintly, one by one, emitting the same 4 numbers in static whispers. 37, 13, 11, 9. A mantra, a warning, or a key. I didn't know. But I kept repeating it to myself under my breath, like an anchor to keep my mind from drifting. Then came the clearing. I don't know how to explain it. It was wide and circular, surrounded by trees that bent backward, as if recoiling from whatever sat in the center. A makeshift altar constructed from old radio parts, wires, melted plastics, and bones. So many bones. Animal mostly, but not all. On the altar, a single device sat upright. A reel-to-reel recorder, ancient but intact. The tape spooled and ready. I didn't touch it. It began to play on its own. This time, the voice was different. Male. Calm. Too calm. We thought it was communication. We thought we had intercepted a pattern, but we weren't receiving. We were being answered. Every transmission was an invitation, every frequency a door, and we kept opening them, not because we were curious, because we were proud. We mistook mimicry for contact. They only repeat what we say, because that's how they learn the shape of us. The tape hissed and cut. I waited. Nothing else came. Then the screaming began. Not around me. Inside the headset. Inside my skull. Not words. Sounds. Anguish played backward. Emotion stripped of grammar. I threw the headset to the ground, and the moment it touched soil, the screaming stopped. I picked it up. Silence. I dropped it again. Screaming. It was using the device to echo back pain. I ran. Through thorned trails, under half-collapsed signage, past relics of runners who never finished. Bibs hanging like wind chimes from branches, shoes dangling from trees, a backpack that moved slightly as I passed, though there was no wind. At mile 39, I collapsed at the base of a sign. Caution. Beyond this point, the trail is unmaintained. Proceed at own risk. Handwritten below it, in what I knew was human blood. It was never maintained to begin with. It just pretended. I rested there, gasping, ears ringing, vision blurred. I tried to drink from my water pack. Dry. I searched my pockets. Found the number scrawled in my notebook. 37, 13, 11, 9. I looked up. 4 trees around me. Their bark stripped in vertical lines. 4 scratchings beside each one. I approached the nearest. A 37 carved into it. The next, 13. The next, 11. The last, 9. I stood in the center of them and waited. The ground pulsed once, just once, like a heartbeat. And then I understood. The signal had never been coming from the tower. It had been coming from here. The tower just redirected it. A decoy, a funnel. They weren't broadcasting to us. They were tracing the echoes of those who listened. And I had listened. I crossed the boundary marked by the 4 trees with a deliberate slowness. Unsure if I was stepping into something real or willingly entering a memory that didn't belong to me. The sensation wasn't immediate, not like crossing a threshold where everything changes in an instant. It was subtler, like a breath held too long, or a silence stretching beyond its natural limit. The deeper I walked, the more the forest lost its orientation. Trails stopped leading anywhere. Trees rearranged themselves when I wasn't looking. My compass spun, then cracked. I no longer knew which direction I was facing, only that something ahead of me knew I was coming, and it remembered the exact shape of me. They call it Cradle Hollow on the old race maps, a name whispered among runners like a superstition, often dismissed with a laugh or a shrug. But those who had been here, those few who had reached this point and returned with sanity only half intact, spoke of it differently. A place that watches, a hollow that listens, not an area on a map, but a presence stretched across a space. I once thought places couldn't remember, but this one did, and it knew who I was before I arrived. The light changed, although I never saw the sun move. A pale, directionless illumination hung in the air, neither day nor night. The colors of the world became sickly, as if bleached of meaning. Green leaves faded into a muted gray. The soil turned almost blue beneath my feet. The trees here had no bark, only thin, fibrous membranes that pulsed faintly, like skin under tension. Every footstep I took made them twitch, as if flinching from contact. The radio signal was gone now, not just silent, absent, like it had never been there at all. The only sound was the faint, wet rustle of the hollow breathing around me. I tried to hum, to make any noise to remind myself that I was still inside my body, that my thoughts belonged to me. But every sound I made was returned. Half a second later, slightly altered, as if someone nearby was repeating everything I did. Not an echo, a response. I passed what looked like an old milestone, cracked in half, its numbers unreadable. Something was carved into the exposed stone with what might have been a knife or claws. You were here before. Not past tense, not a warning. A statement, a reminder. I didn't stop to question it. The further I walked, the more my memories began to shimmer at the edges, like overheated film. I remembered faces that didn't exist. I recalled a girl I never met whispering my name in a language I didn't speak. I saw myself sleeping beneath trees I hadn't yet found. The hollow was not just aware of me, it was reordering me, rethreading my timeline like someone flipping through old footage and splicing in new scenes. and still I walked. I found the first grave marker just before what might have once been a dry creek bed. A simple stone slab, weathered, unnamed. At its base, a pair of running shoes, bleached white, laces tied together. Something told me not to touch them, not out of fear, out of respect. This was someone who had made it here before me, and had not left. The second marker was farther in. This one had a name, Malens. I recognized it. He had gone missing during the third unofficial run of the marathon, a man obsessed with tracing the original course before it had been commercialized. His body was never recovered, but here he was, or at least his memory. The hollow had kept him. At mile 41, I stopped feeling the hunger. I knew I should be starving. I hadn't eaten in almost a day, but the sensation was gone, not replaced, erased. The same with thirst, fatigue, pain. I tested myself, cut a small line on my forearm with my compass shard. It didn't hurt, it didn't even bleed. The skin remained split, the damage visible, but the body no longer responded. The hollow was numbing me, little by little, disassembling the warnings that kept me human. There was a clearing next, but unlike the others, this one wasn't empty. A circle of runners stood there, motionless, eyes closed, facing inward, as if caught in the moment just before beginning a ritual. Their clothes were weathered, some from decades past. One wore a jacket with the logo of the inaugural race. Another had a bib stained dark with time and mold. I counted 11 of them. None moved, none breathed. I stepped closer, certain it was a display, a warning, a hallucination. I reached out to touch the nearest shoulder. The figure crumbled into ash before my fingers made contact, as if only the act of intention had triggered the collapse. One by one, they followed, folding into dust, rising in a silent spiral, until the clearing was empty again. In the center of where they stood, I found a single object, a cassette tape. No player, no label, just the tape, half unwound, tangled in a knot that formed the shape of an infinity loop. I didn't take it, but the moment I turned away, I heard it, my own voice, coming from behind me, repeating the words I'd muttered to myself at the mile 30 marker. Words I didn't even know I'd said aloud. The voice was mine, but slower, tired, drained of self. I ran. I don't remember how long I ran. Time had become irrelevant. The forest offered no progression. I only knew I was approaching something because I began to recognize the trees again, but not from before, from dreams. The same ones I'd had in the weeks leading up to the race. Dreams I had chalked up to stress or excitement, but they were memories. Of this, of now, of here. The hollow had been reaching for me long before I arrived, and then I heard it. My name, not shouted, not whispered, sung. A soft, lullaby-like melody, carried on air that didn't move, coming from nowhere and everywhere. It wasn't the voice of a person. It was the forest itself rearranged into a tone, bending physics to imitate comfort. But it didn't comfort me. It terrified me, because I knew the moment I answered I would never leave. Not because I'd be killed, but because I would want to stay. I did not respond. I tore the race bib from my chest and stuffed it into the earth. I covered it with rocks, dirt, leaves, anything to make the hollow think I had given up. Then I crawled beneath the roots of a fallen tree and waited. For what? I didn't know. Maybe until the hollow grew bored. Maybe until I became ash like the others. But it never came. And that scared me more than anything, because it meant it was still listening. And worse, it was still waiting. I had crossed a threshold, not of geography, but of self. The moment I left the grove, I would no longer be the same person who entered it. And I feared that when I finally spoke again, it wouldn't be me who answered. There's a misconception about Mothman, that he's a phantom sentinel guarding bridges or warning about collapses, that he's tied to Point Pleasant alone, that he appears only when tragedy is near. Those beliefs are fragments, shadows of an older truth, the same way a silhouette gives no hint of the creature casting it. What people forget, or perhaps refuse to admit, is that Mothman is not bound to places. He's bound to people, to witnesses, to those who've seen too much, walked too far, crossed the line between observation and knowledge. And once he knows you've looked back, he doesn't wait at intersections. He follows. The moment I crawled out from under the tree, I knew the hollow was no longer the only thing watching me. There was a change in the temperature that had nothing to do with weather. Less a drop in degrees, more like the memory of warmth evaporating. The forest had grown quieter, which seemed impossible, considering it had already been unnaturally still. But now the silence wasn't passive. It had weight, intent. I was no longer navigating geography. I was being moved through it. I emerged at what should have been mile 43, though no sign marked it. The trail dipped and opened into a narrow, wind-scarred gulch lined with dying saplings and loose shale. Above, the canopy thinned just enough to show a patch of bruised sky. Not quite dawn, not quite dusk. That's when I heard it. A low, pulsing thrum that didn't come from anywhere specific, but vibrated inside my chest like a second heartbeat. At first, I mistook it for the rhythmic echo of blood in my ears. But it was external, mechanical, like a frequency I was never supposed to perceive had been tuned directly into my nervous system. I didn't see him, not at first. I saw the shadow of him, cast in the wrong direction, a winged silhouette against a tree that had no business projecting such a form. It twitched, then folded, then rose along the trunk like smoke reversing into the sky. My legs moved on their own, not out of panic but necessity, like something primal had seized control, a genetic memory of flight from predator baked into the marrow. I stumbled through the gulch, eyes forward, refusing to look back, but I could feel it. Not footsteps, not wing beats, presence, a proximity that didn't close in, but pressed through reality, as if it was coexisting in multiple layers of perception and had chosen to let me notice just one. I passed a discarded stopwatch, cracked, its hands spinning counterclockwise, a bib number pinned to the remains of a jacket torn clean through the back, a journal waterlogged and half open to a page that read, "He doesn't need you to believe, he just needs you to see." I did, and I was paying the price. The next mile was distortion incarnate. Paths repeated themselves. Rocks I stepped over appeared again 10 seconds later. Trees shifted behind my blink, refusing to stay anchored. The sky above fractured, split by silent flashes of crimson that didn't illuminate but burned themselves onto my vision. My watch buzzed violently. Its GPS reactivated for half a second, long enough to show a blip labeled "Observer marked." Then the screen died again. At the edge of the next clearing, I found the remains of a tent, not just collapsed, inverted. The fabric had turned inside out, poles snapped in unnatural bends. Inside, a sleeping bag still zipped. No body, only an impression. Whoever had been here had vanished mid-sleep, as if vacuumed from the world. Carved into the tree beside it, "We're not supposed to bring them home." My skin turned to ice, because suddenly, the distance between seeing something and being followed by it felt dangerously short. That's when I heard the wings, not flapping, not beating, sliding, like sails shifting against gravity. I didn't look. I couldn't. But every instinct screamed that he was above me, just behind the clouds, folded into the shape of what birds fear, a shape that wasn't meant to be seen from below, but from the corner of the eye, from a reflection in water, from a flash in dreams. I ran again, but this time my legs felt detached, like I was controlling a body slightly removed from me. He wasn't chasing. He was arriving, in my perception, my thoughts, my memory. I passed signs that shouldn't exist, road markers buried in soil, a stop sign bent into a perfect circle, a power pole with wires cut clean, humming with no visible current, urban structures inside the forest, as if the boundary between wilderness and civilization had broken down under the pressure of something ancient reasserting itself. And still, he was behind me, not closer, not farther, just constant. At mile 45, the wind returned, but it wasn't natural. It came from the wrong direction, upward, like a draft from a cellar, and it carried a voice. My voice, whispering phrases I hadn't said aloud since I was a child, things I told myself to sleep, things I swore I had forgotten. The windows aren't for looking out, they're for looking in. If you close your eyes, they open theirs. Nonsense. Except it wasn't. Not here. In a final act of desperation, I reached the base of an observation tower long since condemned. Metal rusted through, stairs missing, graffiti covering every panel with eyes, wings, and names. Names of the runners. Names of the missing. My name, freshly scratched. I climbed. I don't remember how. My body shouldn't have been capable, but I reached the top, and there I saw him. Not full, Not revealed, just present, in the clouds, in the break of sky, in the way the treetops leaned toward one direction. Two red points of light, too far apart to be eyes, too aligned to be coincidence. A suggestion of form, not avian, not humanoid, something designed to be seen wrong. A predator not of the body but of narrative, of attention. I realized then that Mothman didn't want to kill. He wanted to witness and be witnessed, to infect perception, to echo. And once your mind echoes him back, he never truly leaves. When I blinked, he was gone, but the red remained, in my vision, in my mind. The tower creaked beneath me. I knew I couldn't stay, so I descended, one rung at a time, and every step felt like walking further into his memory, not away from it. At the bottom, taped to the last rusted beam, was a photo, black and white, faded. It showed a group of runners smiling. Behind them, barely visible in the tree line, two red dots, not eyes, but acknowledgments. I flipped the photo. On the back, one line. If you saw this, he already knows your face. And I had. Now the question wasn't whether I'd finish the race, it was whether I'd reach the end still human. Most people think the first Hollow Marathon happened in the 1990s, when the town council tried to rebrand itself after decades of economic rot. They think it was a community initiative, a PR stunt, a quirky local tradition. That belief is not just wrong, it's dangerous. Because once you realize the race has happened before, under different names, in different decades, with different outcomes, you start asking who survived to forget it, and why. I didn't plan to stop at mile 47, but something made me. Not fatigue. I had gone numb to that long ago. It was a structure, buried, out of place. A half-sunken bunker overgrown with pine roots and covered in decades of moss. The kind of installation that doesn't show up on municipal maps because it was never built for the public. There were no signs, no fences, just a faded red X sprayed over a cracked steel hatch, and below it, the number 1971. The year echoed in my mind like an alarm I hadn't realized was ringing. My uncle had spoken about it once, drunk, shaking, said he had run a race when he was young, a secret marathon, invitation only, said he'd won. Then he wept like it was a curse. My family dismissed it as PTSD from Vietnam, but he was never deployed. That had always bothered me. And now, standing at this hatch, the pieces clicked into place like a puzzle someone had hidden inside my bloodline. The hatch was sealed, but not locked. I pulled. Metal groaned like it hadn't been touched in decades. Inside, stairs, narrow, swallowed by darkness. I should have walked away. I should have kept running. But there's something about the truth. Once it shows you a sliver of its face, you either keep staring or spend the rest of your life haunted by the glimpse. The bunker smelled of rust and ozone. The walls dripped with condensation, but it wasn't water. The fluid shimmered, iridescent, humming faintly when I passed. The staircase led to a chamber, not large, but wide enough for rows of benches, lockers, and old cathode screens stacked like a mission control room for an event that had never been broadcast. On one of the walls, a rusted plaque read, Apex Performance Monitoring, Project Nocturnal Velocity. Below that, scratched into the metal, Trial 003, 1971. I flipped a breaker. For a moment, nothing. Then, static. The screens flickered. Grainy footage. Runners in short shorts and sweatbands. Laughing, stretched at the start line. An announcer's voice crackled. Welcome to the Hollow Ridge Invitational. Closed circuit only, internal eyes only. Then, screaming. The tape cut. Replaced by footage of trees buckling. Runners disappearing mid-frame. Blood on the lens. Someone yelling, "Kill the feed!" before the screen went black. I found a file cabinet rusted shut, kicked it until the drawer jammed loose. Inside, folders, faded, water damaged. One stood out, Subject 16, R. Hallow. The runner was listed as disqualified, no reason. Below, marked, yes. Attached was a Polaroid, a face blurred beyond recognition, but behind him unmistakable. A winged outline, mid-flight, its proportions wrong. Wings too wide, eyes glowing, caught by the flash. A scribbled note underneath. Subject followed for 72 hours. Terminated. No burial. Protocol 7 enforced. Every document reeked of panic pretending to be order. They had tried to study it, contain it. They thought the marathon was the variable. It wasn't. The people were. The run was the ritual. The movement, the surveillance, the collective attention, a loop that called something back. And in 1971, they ran it without understanding what they were invoking. The last entry in the logbook chilled me. Dated December 5, 1971. Entity broke containment. 6 observers neutralized. Remaining footage locked under Project Red Lantern. Order to erase all references issued. Future events must appear organic, public-facing, recreational. Beneath that, written in red ink, next viable window, 1997. Begin seeding memory loss. That's when I understood. The race had never been about finish lines. It was about witnesses, testing who would run and what they'd carry back. The entire event was a controlled detonation of truth, designed to measure how many minds could survive the blast. But something went wrong in 71. Someone survived, and instead of burying it, they became the echo. My uncle, and maybe others, which meant that I wasn't the first to see these things, just the most recent to get far enough to start understanding them. As I backed out of the bunker, I noticed a mirror on the wall I hadn't seen before. Old, cracked. I glanced at it. My reflection smiled, but I didn't. I slammed the hatch shut behind me and ran, not from fear, but from implication. If 1971 had been wiped from the records, how many others had been? What was the cost of remembering? And more importantly, was I being allowed to remember, or being made to? At mile 48, I passed another runner, pale, shivering. He looked at me and whispered, "You found it, didn't you?" Before I could answer, he kept walking, not running, toward the trees. He didn't look back. I never saw him again. That night, my dreams were filled with numbers. 48, 71, 16. They rearranged like a countdown, and beneath them, a whisper. One more loop, and we're in. I didn't know if it meant the finish line was close, or if I was being pulled into a race that never ends. There are places that exist outside the language we use to describe them. Places that resist metaphor, classification, memory. Places that refuse to be mapped, not because they are hidden, but because they erase the part of you that tries to remember them. The field wasn't supposed to be there. It wasn't supposed to be anything, not according to topographical scans, municipal records, or GPS grids. But there it was. After mile 51, past the old water tower with the rusted-out warning sign, "No trespassing, Department of Interior, 1968." A narrow dirt trail split from the main path and vanished into a gulch of fog. I didn't want to follow it, but my legs moved anyway. At first I thought it was a clearing, a natural depression where the forest gave up and exposed a circle of earth. But there were no roots, no insects, no wind, just silence, thick, anesthetizing. The sky above it bent wrong, like light was being pulled slightly sideways, and the air had that strange stillness you feel in a room full of people when someone has just died, but no one has screamed yet. I stepped forward. My foot sank, not into soil, but into something softer, spongy. When I pulled it back, there was a fine gray dust clinging to my shoe. Not ash, bone powder, crushed so fine it behaved like silt. I wasn't alone. They stood at the far edge of the field, 15 of them, spaced evenly, wearing numbers. Not bibs, tattoos, inked across their bare chests, shoulders, forearms, Roman numerals. I threw 15. No one spoke, no one moved, until I stepped into the center. Then all at once their heads turned toward me. I didn't run. One of them stepped forward. A tall woman, eyes sunken, lips stitched shut with copper wire. She pointed to my chest. I looked down. A number had appeared. 17. My heart punched my ribs. I was number 17, not 16, which meant someone else had taken that spot. Someone before me, someone I was about to replace. The others began to hum, low, droning, harmonic in a way that hurt my molars. The woman removed a small object from her palm and placed it at my feet. A stopwatch, old, cracked, still ticking. Inside the glass, the second hand spun backward. I understood what was happening, but not why. This wasn't part of the marathon. This was the marathon, or at least one of its layers. Deeper, more ancient, more ritualistic. A convergence point, a place where time looped inward and runners were measured not by their speed, but by what they carried into the silence. Pain, memory, secrets. It wasn't about finishing. It was about being absorbed. I stepped back. The number on my chest pulsed. My skin burned. The sky above the field darkened, and from its center, a sound emerged. Not thunder, not wind, but something alive, screaming, not in fear or agony, but in declaration. A war cry from something massive and hollow-throated, echoing through dimensions that hadn't yet formed. The woman raised her hand again. Her eyes rolled back. The others began to run, not toward me, but around me, forming a circle, feet pounding the ground in perfect sync, dust and bone rising. My lungs refused to breathe it in. My vision flickered, and in the spinning chaos, I saw flashes. A child's shoe buried half deep in the soil, a military insignia with the word "Veil" embossed across it, a man in a blood-stained lab coat screaming through a two-way mirror, a map with this very field circled in red and labeled only with a single word: error. The screaming from the sky got louder. I dropped to my knees, covered my ears, but it wasn't sound anymore. It was inside me, vibrating my teeth, cracking my thoughts open. Images poured in like floodwater. Other marathons, other fields, other loops of reality stacked like VHS tapes left in the sun, melting together. I saw runners from 1971, from 1943, from 1889, from years that didn't exist. I saw them bleed, vanish, scream, kneel, worship. I saw them become part of the course. When I looked up, the woman was gone. So were the others. I stood alone in the field, and the dust had settled. Except now, at the center of the space, a symbol had been burned into the earth. Two wings folded into a circle, pierced by a single vertical line. I had seen it before, in the bunker footage, behind the runner labeled Subject 16. And once again, I heard a voice, but this time, not from the sky. It came from my own mouth. The course does not end. It folds. I didn't recognize my voice. I didn't remember speaking. But the sentence came again, deeper, like it had always been waiting. The course does not end. It folds. We are not the first. We are not the last. We are the rhythm. Then silence returned. The field dimmed. The sky resumed its color. My number vanished from my chest. My lungs began to breathe again. My heartbeat slowed. And behind me, the path reappeared. When I stepped out of the field, I found a new mile marker. It wasn't numbered. Just a symbol carved into wood. The same folded wings. Below it, a phrase: "Do not speak of this stretch." But I knew I would. I had to. Because if the field exists for every runner, and not all runners come back, then someone has to remember why they don't. I continued forward. My legs moved slower now. My breath felt borrowed. The miles felt longer. Something had changed. Something had taken residence in me. A frequency, a fragment, a beat. And from now on, with each step, I would be echoing it forward. Only 2 miles remained. And then, the finish line, or whatever was pretending to be one. The last 2 miles felt like walking across the deck of a ship no longer floating in water, but suspended above something far deeper and far more conscious than ocean. The ground wasn't wrong, but it was no longer earth, not in the strictest definition. It accepted my steps like it had been waiting for them, as though my weight had been accounted for before I ever existed. The air no longer moved in wind, but in pulses, as if the atmosphere itself had adopted a heart, and I was being drawn closer to it, not by momentum, but by something that knew I was coming, and had always known. It didn't welcome me, it simply acknowledged me, the way a maze recognizes its final rat. The trees thinned, not naturally, but as if something had peeled them back. The forest didn't end. It receded, made room, and in that vast clearing, under a sky that looked like a lid pressed too tightly over the world, stood the finish line. But it wasn't marked by ribbons, banners, or even flags. It was a line of light, cold, sterile, vertical, floating 3 feet off the ground, buzzing slightly, like a surgical laser someone had forgotten to turn off. A single man stood beside it. He wore the exact uniform as the Project Veil staff from the 1971 footage. Same armband, same dark clipboard, same reflective sunglasses. He looked up as I approached, but said nothing. Instead, he raised the clipboard and turned it toward me. My name was written at the top in red. Below it, 3 status fields: physical, degraded but operational; psychological, fractured, stabilizing; reintegration potential, null. Then, in bold, do not allow to exit. He lowered the clipboard and stepped aside. Behind him, through the light, I saw not a road but a corridor, metallic, silent, surgical in its architecture. Fluorescent lights pulsed overhead. I didn't see any cameras, but I felt watched, not like prey, but like inventory, like something about to be tagged and filed. I turned to the man and finally he spoke. Runner 17. Completion acknowledged. Containment initiated. I asked him what this meant, what this place was, what I had just gone through, but he didn't answer me. Instead, he removed an earpiece from his collar and whispered into it, subject aware, vocalizing breach queries, prepare protocol switch. Then he looked directly into my eyes and said, step through, but I couldn't move, not yet. My legs, willing to carry me through miles of heat, blood, screams, and hallucinations, now refused the final step. Because the line, it hummed, it hissed, it remembered. And behind that light, I saw things, flickers, not memories, but outcomes. I saw myself walking into that corridor and never walking out. I saw rows of bodies, some dismembered, others frozen in poses of terror, eyes wide, mouths open in eternal protest. I saw a file labeled Behavioral Observation, R17, Failure to Integrate, and I saw a stamp, Redirect to Loop C. The man stepped closer, voice still monotone. If you do not proceed voluntarily, sedation will be administered. Please comply. But something deeper inside me resisted. Not fear, not pride, but pattern recognition. The same pattern I'd felt in the field. The same voice that had spoken through me. The loop. This wasn't the end. This was the folding point. The reset. The marathon didn't end at the finish line. The finish line was the trick. The myth. The bait. The containment gate. I stepped back. The man didn't flinch. He only clicked a pen. Once. Twice. A signal. From the woods, 6 others emerged. All dressed the same, but none walked with human rhythm. They moved in perfect symmetry. No noise, no breath, just intent. I ran. I didn't think. I didn't breathe. I just turned and tore back into the trees. But they didn't chase me, because they didn't have to. As I moved, the forest shifted. Reality looped. Trees reappeared where they had already been burned. Fog crept upward from dry soil. My own footprints reversed in the dirt behind me. The sky turned a shade darker, and the sun blinked, not set, blinked, as if the simulation had stuttered. I reached a road. It wasn't the one I had come from. A car was parked ahead, empty, running, headlights on. Inside, on the dashboard, was a map, handwritten, not printed. It showed the course, all of it, every deviation, every blind spot, every off-record checkpoint and field. But one corner was circled. Origin point, true start. A note beside it read, exit is only possible through the entry wound. I climbed in. The engine was already warm. The keys were in the ignition, but the fuel gauge was dead. I drove anyway. The road unraveled forward. The forest bent out of the way, and mile by mile my memory began to fracture again. Not from trauma, but from intervention. Something didn't want me remembering this stretch. I fought to keep my mind intact, repeating facts aloud, narrating every second like an anchor in a collapsing broadcast. When I reached the point marked True Start, it was just a trailhead, a rusted gate, a sign that said, closed due to wildlife activity, Park Service, 1994. There was a burn mark on the post, a symbol, wings inside a circle, pierced. I got out, walked toward the gate. The air shifted. Then I stepped through, and the world changed. I was home, in my kitchen, kettle whistling, phone buzzing. No sign of the race, no wounds, no dust, no numbers. But on my wrist, faintly, I could still see the tattoo, 7th even, and on my counter, an envelope. Inside, a single photograph, a blurry snapshot of the finish line. On the back, it read, you ran well, now forget. But I won't. I can't. Because when I close my eyes, I still hear them running, and I know they're waiting for me to start again.